I never expected her to remember my name, let alone everything else. It was close to midnight, and the corner cafe was quieter than usual, a few regulars nursing half-drunk lattes under the dim, warm lights. I had my headphones on, but wasn't listening to anything, just scrolling through messages I'd never sent, thumbs hovering over conversations that felt too fragile to risk. Then she walked in. Mrs. Albright, my friend's mom, though I'd never actually call her that. She had that quiet confidence, the kind that didn't need words, but somehow filled the room anyway. Her coat was beige, slightly oversized, sleeves rolled back to show the cuff of a soft sweater underneath. She glanced at the counter, paused, then noticed me, and for a heartbeat, our eyes met. "Hey, you're here late," she said, voice soft but steady. I shrugged, fumbling with my cup. "Yeah, couldn't sleep. Thought coffee might help." She smiled, just a hint, the kind that didn't ask anything but gave a lot away. I noticed her hands as she set her toad on the floor, long fingers, slightly trembling, maybe from cold, maybe from something else I didn't want to name. I wanted to look away, but I kept watching, noting the small tremor. "You always get the same thing," she said, nodding at my cup of black coffee. "Black, not a touch of sugar." Huh, I said, embarrassed that she remembered. "Habit, I guess." She laughed softly, like she just found some private joke. I wanted to say something clever, but my tongue had gone quiet. So I just folded my hands over my cup and let the silence linger between us. There was warmth in it, and danger too, though I didn't know why I thought it was dangerous. I realized I'd been doing this for weeks, coming late, sitting at the corner table, watching people leave, noticing the little rhythms of the world that made it bearable. It wasn't loneliness like a scream, but like leaving a window cracked on a winter night. A slow, quiet ache that you carried everywhere. She shifted in her seat across from me, leaning slightly forward, and I caught the faint scent of her perfume, something floral, old books, and rain. My mind caught on that scent and refused to move. I didn't know what to say, didn't know if I wanted to. "So, your friend," I said, trying to break the silence, though my voice came out hesitant, half-formed. "Gone for the weekend. Thought I'd check in," she said, flicking her eyes toward the small notebook she carried, then back to me. There was something unreadable in that glance, a weight I couldn't measure. I wanted to reach out, but I didn't. Instead, I noticed the way her fingers tapped lightly against the edge of the counter, the subtle rise and fall of her shoulder as she exhaled. Tiny gestures that somehow said more than words ever could. We talked a little, quiet things, traffic, the weather, a joke my friend had told last week, but every sentence felt like threading a needle. At some point, the cafe's clock ticked past midnight, and the world outside was washed in streetlight and quiet rain. She stood to leave, and I found myself holding my breath. "See you around," I said, almost too softly to hear. She paused at the door, one hand on the handle, then turned slightly, and for a moment, it felt like she might linger, might say something she wouldn't, but she just smiled faintly. "Maybe," she said. Then she was gone, leaving the faint scent of rain and perfume behind, and me staring at the empty doorway, wondering if I'd imagined the whole thing. My phone buzzed on the table. A text from an unknown number. I picked it up, thumb hovering, coffee again. "Tomorrow night." And just like that, everything felt like it had shifted, though I wasn't sure how or why. The next night, I showed up at the cafe again, exactly on time this time, like I'd planned it for days in my head. She was already there, seated at the same corner table, notebook open, a steaming cup of chamomile in front of her. "Back so soon," she said, voice light but carrying that same quiet edge of notice. "I didn't want to miss it," I said, fumbling with my sleeve, staring at the condensation forming on my own mug. She tilted her head, eyes catching mine for a fraction too long. "I'm glad you came." We settled into that delicate rhythm, talking about little things, the rain from yesterday, a book she'd started but never finished, the neighbor's cat that refused to use the litter box. Then she paused, tracing a finger along the rim of her cup. "I used to come here with my husband," she said quietly. "We never really sat in silence like this, though, always talking over each other. I missed this." The words landed somewhere unexpected, and I felt a little of my chest loosen and tighten at the same time. My own fingers curled around the warmth of the mug. I wanted to ask questions, to say something clever, but I stayed quiet, letting the weight of her admission settle between us. It was risky, this. She was my friend's mom, older than anyone I'd ever seriously thought about, divorced, carrying memories I couldn't touch, but could sense like shadows in the corners of the room. And still, sitting there across from her, I imagined scenarios, her laughing quietly at something I said, brushing my hand when we reached for the sugar together, even the idea of her leaning into me just a little closer. I shook my head lightly, trying to push those thoughts down. But then she offered me a teaspoon with a soft, "Here, careful, it's hot." Her hand brushed mine, and I felt the briefest jolt like static electricity under skin, and I had to remind myself to breathe. We didn't talk much after that, just sipped our drinks, both of us lost in small, separate thoughts, the hum of the cafe wrapping around us like a blanket. I caught her glancing up at me once, a faint smile twitching, and I realized we'd both been thinking the same thing, something unspoken, hovering just beyond words. When it was time to leave, she gathered her things slowly, fingers lingering over the notebook. "Thanks for tonight," she said, almost casual, but the pause in her tone made it anything but casual. I nodded, hesitating. "Yeah, me too." She touched the edge of my hand lightly as she passed, almost by accident, but I felt it all the same, a gesture that meant more than it appeared, heavy with possibility. Her gaze met mine for a second, steady and soft, and then she was gone, leaving the faint scent of chamomile and something else I couldn't name. I stayed there a moment, sipping the last of my coffee, thinking about how ordinary the night had seemed and how utterly it had unsettled me. I didn't know why that moment stayed with me. Maybe because it felt like someone finally saw me. The next evening, I found her in the lobby of her building, juggling keys in a bag that was clearly heavier than it should be. I was coming back from the grocery store, my arms full of paper bags, fumbling as always, and she gave me that quick, polite smile, the one that made me pause in place even though we'd done this before. "Hey," I said, a little breathless from the stairs, trying not to sound like I'd rehearsed it all day. "Hey," she answered, shifting the bag. "You're early." "Yeah, groceries," I mumbled. My eyes flicked to her hands, noticing the slight strain in her fingers. Tiny things. How she twisted the strap of her tote. How she tapped a foot against the floor while she waited for the elevator. I didn't reach out, didn't offer to help, though every instinct wanted to. The elevator dinged, and she pressed the button with her elbow. "I didn't know you lived nearby," she said, voice casual, but her glance lingered just a fraction too long. "Yeah, same street," I said. My mouth went dry. She always had this way of making ordinary words feel loaded. We walked together to the lobby door, small talk trailing off as we moved. A neighbor appeared with a dog, chatting about some package delivered late, and she smiled politely at the interruption. I noticed the faint crease of concern in her brow. Something like she wanted to stay in this quiet bubble with me, but the world kept pulling her out. By the time we reached the street, the rain had started lightly. She hesitated under the awning, coat collar up, hair damp at the edges. "I should get inside," she said, but didn't move. I wanted to ask her to walk a few blocks together, just to feel her presence a little longer, but I stopped. My hands fumbled with the grocery bag straps, my words lost somewhere between caution and longing. She looked at me, eyes soft, lips parted slightly, and I could see her uncertainty, the tiny hesitation in her shoulder, like she wanted to lean in, but didn't. I felt the same, almost moved closer, almost reached out, almost but not. A car passed, splashing water against the curb, and the moment fractured. She stepped back, shook her coat, glanced down at her shoes. "Well, see you tomorrow," she said, voice tentative. "Yeah," I whispered, though it sounded louder than I meant. She gave me a small smile, fleeting, almost apologetic. Her fingers brushed mine, accidental maybe, but enough to make me pause, heart thudding. I didn't pull away, not immediately. She didn't either. We stood like that for a moment, inches apart, the rain dripping from her hair onto the sidewalk, and everything else, neighbors' cars, the cold street, disappearing into the quiet. Then she stepped back, muttered, "I should really go," and turned, leaving me with the echo of that nearly touch, that almost confession, that suspended pause that made me question everything I thought I knew about being seen. And me, standing there, hands still fumbling with groceries, thinking, almost everything. It was a Thursday evening, and I found her sitting on the bench outside the building, the sun already gone, leaving the street in a pale wash of streetlight. She had her coat wrapped tight, knees drawn slightly up, and she was staring at nothing in particular, hands clasped around her bag. "Hey," I said softly, approaching. My footsteps echoed a little too loudly on the wet pavement. She glanced up, startled for a fraction of a second, then softened. "Hey." We sat in silence for a while, just breathing in the quiet street, the occasional distant car. I wanted to fill the gap. Wanted to say something, anything, but I couldn't. "I saw your friend today," she said finally, voice low. "He mentioned the party this weekend. You're invited." I swallowed, felt my chest tighten. Jealousy, sharp, confusing, bubbled under my ribs, and I hated myself for it. Not her fault, obviously, but the thought of him there, of her talking to him, smiling for him, it had twisted in me. "I didn't know," I said, trying to sound casual, but my voice cracked just a little. She shifted, glancing at me, eyes careful, watching. "I know. I just thought you should know. It's nothing." "Nothing," I repeated, almost bitter, though I tried to catch it before it landed too harshly. I wanted to reach for her hand, wanted to say something that could undo the lump in my throat, but I stayed put, fingers curled tight in my pockets. There was a pause, the street silent except for the hum of far-off traffic. She sighed softly, like she was letting down a wall she hadn't realized she'd been holding up. She started, then stopped, eyes flicking away. I don't know why I always feel like I have to be careful around you." I swallowed again. That pause, it spoke more than any words could. I wanted to say, "I feel the same. I want more than I should. I want you." But the words didn't come. Instead, I shifted slightly, closer, careful not to touch, letting my shoulder almost brush hers. My fingers itched to reach for her hand, to close that tiny distance, but I held back. She tried again, voice almost breaking. "Sometimes I wish things were different." Her gaze met mine, raw, exposed, and I felt the whole world shrink to that quiet street, the cold beneath our coats, the faint scent of her hair. I wanted to tell her everything, confess the restless nights, the tiny daydreams, the way my chest clenched every time she smiled. But I didn't. Instead, we sat there, inching closer without moving, breaths synchronized, silence humming louder than anything we could say. And then she asked it, not in words, but in the tilt of her head, the way her lips parted, the way her hand hovered just above her bag, like she wanted permission. "Could we?" I didn't answer. I didn't move. But my heart did, racing in a quiet, impossible rhythm, waiting for something irreversible. The next week, things shifted. I stopped seeing her at the cafe, stopped catching glimpses in the lobby. I thought maybe it was coincidence at first. Maybe she was busy. Maybe life had its own plans. But the absence felt like a weight pressing down on everything else. I sat at the corner table one evening, notebook open, coffee cooling beside me, staring at the door, expecting her to appear. I had rehearsed the words I might say if she came, but she didn't. The barista glanced at me once, curious, then returned to her tasks. When my phone buzzed mid-scroll, my heart jumped. I almost hoped it was her, but it was a reminder from the grocery app, a simple alert, order ready for pickup. My chest sank. Later, I walked past her building, trying not to seem obvious, hoping maybe she'd be at the window, waving something, anything. But the lobby was empty, the lights low, her coat gone from the hook where she'd left it last week. I tried texting, a casual, tentative, "Coffee tonight." Then another, "Miss seeing you today." Both sat unsent for minutes, maybe hours, because I couldn't hit send. My thumb hovered over the screen, wanting the connection, fearing it. Then I heard from my friend, unexpectedly, almost casual. "Hey, saw your friend's mom yesterday. She's busy. Something about seeing her ex. And, the kid stuff." The words hit like a cold wind. Something I hadn't considered, hadn't wanted to imagine, now became a real, pulsing complication. Her ex, her child, her life beyond the small bubble I thought we shared. I hadn't felt heartbroken yet. I felt paused, like life forgot to finish the sentence. I tried to walk through the routines I'd made for myself. Coffee at the corner table, late-night grocery runs, but everything felt hollow. I noticed how empty her usual seat looked, how the sugar packets sat untouched, how the chair across from me waited for someone who wasn't coming. I imagined her with someone else, maybe smiling the same way she had for me, maybe brushing her hair from her face in that same absent-minded way, and I couldn't reconcile the images with the quiet hope I'd been carrying. At home, I stared at the messages unsent, drafts that held fragments of longing, words that felt too small to capture the weight of what I wanted to say. The phone vibrated again, nothing from her. I didn't even want it to be. I thought about knocking on her door, leaving a note, doing something decisive, but my hand stayed on the doorknob, frozen. The apartment was dark inside, the hallway silent. I turned away, every step echoing in a rhythm I couldn't break. And yet, a part of me waited, not hoping exactly, but watching, paused, holding on to the memory of her glance, the weight of her hand brushing mine, the half-smile she left behind. I found her in the kitchen of her apartment, standing over the sink, rinsing dishes that didn't need rinsing, hands submerged in warm water. The evening light slanted across the counter, catching in her hair, turning the damp strands gold. I stood in the doorway, uncertain. The bag of groceries I carried suddenly felt heavy, like it carried all the words I hadn't said. "Hey," I said softly. She glanced up, startled for a fraction of a second, then softened. "Hey." I shuffled forward, setting the bag down, careful not to make the clatter too loud. She leaned against the counter, shoulders tense, eyes not leaving mine. I didn't mean to disappear last week," I said, voice low. I didn't know what to say. Her fingers traced the edge of a plate, almost mechanically. "It's okay," she said, quiet, hesitant, watching. I wanted to reach for her hand, to bridge the space that had been growing between us, but I paused. The risk was more than just embarrassment. This was her life, complicated and real, and I didn't want to break it. I keep thinking about that night, on the bench, I said, finally letting the words out. The almost everything. I keep thinking maybe I should have said more. Her eyes flicked up, a faint crease forming between her brows. "You could have," she whispered, then looked down, tracing the rim of a glass. I stepped closer, careful, not pushing, just closing the distance enough to feel her presence. My voice caught. "I wanted you to know, I see you. Really. Not just the smile or the laugh, or the friend's mom part. You." Her hand froze on the plate. She didn't step back. She didn't move toward me either. But there was a weight in the silence, something fragile and exposed. "I know it's complicated," I said, swallowing, "and I don't want to mess up your life. But I couldn't keep pretending I didn't care." She finally looked up, eyes soft, something like relief or recognition, or maybe just understanding, settling there. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. I reached out, just lightly brushing her hand as she wiped the plate. The touch wasn't bold. It wasn't dramatic. But it was deliberate, a quiet agreement that this was our moment, fragile as it might be. She let her hand rest against mine, just for a second, then whispered, "Okay." And that was it. No declaration, no grand gesture, just a human connection, the kind that feels heavier than words sometimes, the kind that leaves you steady when the world has been spinning too fast. I exhaled slowly, letting the tension slip out with my breath. She returned to the dishes, her shoulder brushing mine. I didn't speak again. Didn't need to. It was enough. It was 8:47 a.m., exactly the way I liked it, the coffee in my hand still warm, steam curling lazily into the quiet kitchen. She was sitting across from me, mug in hand, eyes half closed against the soft sunlight spilling through the blinds. "Black, like always," she said, voice low, almost teasing. I nodded, smiling faintly. "You remembered." She shrugged, reaching for the sugar anyway, just to stir it absent-mindedly before stopping herself. There was comfort in the rhythm of these small, shared gestures, the way the spoon clicked against the mug, the faint sigh of morning from the city outside, the smell of toast and coffee mixing. Nothing grand, nothing cinematic, just us. It hadn't been easy. There were mornings when she didn't answer, afternoons when I considered leaving a message unsent, evenings when the bench outside her building felt like the only place I could breathe. But over time, we learned the quiet contours of each other's lives, her routines, her little pauses, the way she fidgeted with her ring when lost in thought, the way she laughed when I almost spilled coffee across the counter. Yesterday, we'd walked to the corner shop together, talking about nothing, lingering in the drizzle, the bench by the park waiting silently for us, just like it had that night when everything almost happened. I had felt the same pulse of nervous possibility, tempered now by patience, by understanding, by knowing that some things weren't rushed. They were earned. She stirred her tea and glanced up at me, catching my gaze just for a moment. It wasn't a look that demanded anything, but it held the weight of everything we'd almost said, almost done, almost lost. I realized then that it wasn't about grand gestures, declarations, or risk anymore. It was about presence. Quiet, patient, intimate presence. I reached across the table and brushed a stray strand of hair from her face, careful, familiar. She didn't move away. She didn't move closer. Just let it happen. That simple, unspoken acknowledgement carried more weight than any confession ever could. Life wasn't perfect. We still had the occasional missed message, the occasional day where routine swallowed the moment. But the ache of uncertainty had softened into something steadier, warmer, richer in its quiet honesty. We had each other in the moments that mattered, the ordinary ones, the black coffee at 8:47 a.m., the silent walk in drizzle, the bench waiting patiently by the park. I took a slow sip, letting the warmth settle in my chest. She smiled faintly, the kind of smile that had nothing to prove, everything to acknowledge. And in that, I understood everything I needed to. I didn't say it aloud, didn't need to. She knew. I knew. And that was enough. Life had its edges, its small irritations, its lingering hesitations. But with her, it felt grounded, possible, earned, real. I reached for my mug again, fingers brushing hers lightly, and thought quietly to myself, some moments, like this one, are ours alone. And that's enough.